Welcome to Season 3 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place where we explore the past, present, and future of homeopathy from the perspective of a couple of insiders who have been around the homeo block a couple of times.
Homeo block?
We have a special guest today, and it's Rachael Doherty, who is a graduate of AHE and works in a research office, and we're going to talk about a nudist colony
And a murder.
and a murder. We were waiting for Alastair to come on. She and I were chatting because Al just got up and, we had to get him caffeinated before we could put him in front of a microphone. And so we were chatting, and it turns out that where Rachael lives, there was a nudist colony and a murder. And So if you don't mind, that's not the plan for the whole day. We're going to talk about AI and homeopathy, but when someone brings up a nudist colony and a murder, you just can't let that pass by. I mean, we're homeopaths, right? You dig in. Yeah.
Well, and it's also nice that this is where, the national homeopathy conference is every couple of years now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Reston it's a relatively new town in Northern Virginia, and it used to just be woods out here. And so back in the 1940s, there used to be a nudist colony here in the woods that people from DC would go to so that they, wouldn't be seen. And apparently one of the members of the nudist colony brought his estranged wife and child out to see the nudist colony, and there was a murder. It's pretty grisly. It's this terrible, weird story, but nobody knows exactly where the nudist colony was. And so, because it's been so long and there's no documentation about where the nudist colony was, so we just know that the murder happened just outside the nudist colony. So, yeah, that's a little Reston lore.
Wow.
Deeply impressive. I love it. So many questions.
So many questions. I know. We might not get to the topic because I am absolutely obsessed now.
Yeah, I think, come on, we're representing the finest researching minds in homeopathy. And who knows, it might have been a homeopathy research. Oh, no, nudist colony.
I wonder. Actually, the first question that came to my mind is you mentioned that people from DC would come. Was this like naked politician situation, you think?
Who knows?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah, just a reason to nude up. When my kids were little, we used to get National Geographic, would get delivered, and there was, I think it was on the back inside, like the last page, inside back cover, they would have a zip code, and it would say, like, it would be a random zip code, and then they would talk about it. And one of them was a nudist colony. And one of my kids was obsessed with it. And because they had pictures of people farming in the nude. And there was like a guy like picking up a pumpkin or something. And it never could die down. Like if I asked them now, however many, 20 years later, they'd both be like, they probably memorized the zip code. What is it about nudist colonies that just really do bring us to?
They're usually at the beach, though, right?
I mean, I think
You
they could
think?
be anywhere. We've
Well,
encountered.
clearly we had the nudist colony in the woods, so.
All right.
Yeah, yeah. I always think though the playing of sports is sort of outside of the purview. Although Al, you've been known to do some gardening not as clad as perhaps one should be for safety reasons.
Irrelevant. Let's move on.
Okay.
So, um, we have been, I think all three of us have been on a journey of late relating to our work. And it seemed like a really good idea to have a chat about it because it really does pertain to a number of questions relating to homeopathy, most importantly, risk, I would say. And so hence the invitation to Rachael to come and have a chat about what she's been doing and exploring and learning about the use of AI in our field. And I think, how about you okay if I contextualize a couple of things?
Yeah, but can I just say before we get started that I'm so excited I could barely stand it, and I feel like this is probably going to be the best podcast ever.
All right.
Just saying. Well, because every time we talk about it in the research meetings, I walk away from it being like, oh my goodness, there's so much to really think about and to get the community talking about. So, get your cup of tea, get ready for this one. This is serious business. All right. You may
So
proceed.
one of the things that has occurred to me over my journey in homeopathy and my interest in technologies, especially in what we do, which obviously predates artificial intelligence, is that homeopaths have always used technology to speed up and improve what they're doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the card repertory, well, the repertory and the card repertory and the early Dell 386, laptops and some of those funky Mac repertory reference works, Encyclopedia Homeopathica adventures that we all had, were kind of meaningful and important and very different from what goes on in the world of naturopathy and everything else. So in homeopathy, because we, for the most part, don't really engage in physical examination in these parts, we've always been in a better position to utilize telehealth, distance technologies, and practice enhancing technologies. And I just think that that's really important, sort of, like clearing of the throat, information. When AI started to come along, um, I think we all tend to go through the same kind of process, like, oh my God, I'm not going to have a job. I think that, or my life is going to be different, or this is terrible. It means that dot dot dot. And I must admit that I have been through some of those experiences, phrases have gone through my mind, and as perhaps some of the listeners might have experienced along the way. And I must admit, I'm no longer in that position, and I think it's really really important um, to realize perhaps like a cycle of grief or like the stages of um, I don't know, moving through something as we engage with it and learn about it and realize its brilliance and its disadvantages, that I personally am extremely excited about the way in which AI and homeopathy could be used together. So that's the first thought. And then the next thing that I just said contextually is that we got onto it, what would you say, Rachel? Maybe about a year ago in the research office. I think I in my grieving phase or my, oh, this is the end of the world phase, designed a series of about 6 studies that were going to categorically show that AI was going to be incompatible with homeopathy. And the first study that I thought we could do was to see if it's accurate. Is it accurate? The question was, is this tool going to be as good as me or as a senior student in homeopathy? And so designed a study, and it was simply let's get 100 guaranteed cured cases that came out of the brains of um, a homeopath, a live homeopath, and feed that information into artificial intelligence, whatever that meant, and see if the results were the same. And that was the first the first crack, the first task, and I suppose the first answer to a question. All right, I think I've kind of contextualized it from my point of view. Would you want to add anything to that, either of you?
I mean, I want to hear Rachel's like I'm obsessed with the process that she's gone through. And then I think, because I have so many thoughts about the ways in which the community is thinking about AI that I think is really different than the reality. And right.
Well,
But
I
like,
think that's actually a really important point, isn't it? Because, of course, in homeopathy, we have a challenge or a phenomena that acupuncture doesn't have, that naturopathy doesn't have, and that nutritional medicine and chiropractic doesn't have, because we don't have, because what we have in homeopathy is an army of prescribers that are doing so outside of the field of the professional homeopath. So we've got the phenomena of let's grab lots of remedies and let's help ourselves, in a way that doing my own neck adjustment is never going to take off, or needling K22 is never going to take off, or, some of the finer work of naturopathy. And so we are in a way different. So we've got two different groups that are invested in this. We know for sure that mums at home with a sick kid are putting their symptoms into AI and getting a result and giving, and because remedies are freely available in the US, then giving those remedies to their sick loved ones. I think that is a phenomena that no one else in the healthcare field are probably experiencing except for us, just because of the way in which remedy availability meets um, mummiapaths, right? And then I think, on the other hand, which is definitely what's going on in the rest of medicine, physicians, technologists, clinicians are going, I have no idea what to do with this case. I wonder what would happen if I put these details into homeopathy, into an AI bot, and seeing what goes on. And so we've got these two different groups that are engaging. And then we've got the academics. And Denise, maybe you want to weigh in on that one, or at least the scholars of
Later,
our
because
field.
I'm dying for the Rachel thing. Like I
All right.
can't wait anymore.
All
I
right.
can't wait
All right.
anymore. The people need to know what she's been doing.
Well, Rachel, what the hell have you been doing then?
Well, we took your vision and it took us a while to figure out how to do it. So, like trying to put your question into it and structure it into a research paper forced us to start with some baby steps. And now that we're into our second paper with AI, I'm so glad that we started with the baby steps because we started not with these large language models, the chat GPTs, the Groks, those various models that are out there. Although we're doing that now, we started with smaller, purpose-built by homeopaths remedy finders so that we could, take care of all the privacy concerns so that we could get our own heads together so that we could, figure out what was going on. And so basically what we did was we randomly selected 100 cases from our clinic to see, and it wasn't even successful cases, although over 80% of the randomly selected cases that we did get were either resolved or much better. So we have a very high success rate in the clinic. We took those 100 cases and we plugged them into a purpose-built remedy finder just to see if there was overlap between what the homeopath recommended and what the remedy finder recommended. Because when you use these commercially available software solutions, it won't just give you one remedy recommendation. It will usually give you a handful of remedy recommendations, sometimes up to 20 remedy recommendations. And so it's up to you, the consumer to like differentiate among those remedy choices yourself. So it's still not doing all the work for you. So for the first paper, we used the remedy finder to see how much overlap there was and how many times the remedy finder gave a top number one priority remedy recommendation that matched with what the homeopath actually recommended. And so
Be clear because I want to make sure people understand the language you're using. So a purpose-built system. So in other words, there are companies that have made sort of be your own homeopath software packages, varying costs, right? But they're made by homeopaths. So and it's meant to be sort of driven by real homeopathic like um ideals. This isn't sort of a book of protocols. This is like doing it in that way, right?
right. And in a lot of way, and so they were very thoughtful that, the software that we used, we looked at posology, we looked at safety recommendations, we looked at conditions. They made very clear, very clearly distinguished between acute problems and only would prescribe for acute problems. Lots of closed-ended questions in a questionnaire. So it's guiding you through a series of questions to get to a remedy recommendation at the end. You're just not throwing something into a computer. So it's a structured questionnaire. And so by the end of that structured questionnaire, with a limited number of acute conditions, these remedy finders will give you a prioritized list of potential remedies that could be useful in your condition. And it gives you, if your symptoms look like this, then look at this remedy. If your symptoms look like that, look at that remedy. And so that's what we're talking about with the purpose-built remedy finder.
I reckon
Thank
that's really important and a big learning for me because in the in the dump design of let's investigate all of this, I didn't appreciate the difference between a large language model, AI, and a purpose-built remedy finder, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we did, right? And then, well, what have we found, Rachel? We've found that,
So we found that in 59% of the cases that we plugged, 59 of 100 cases, there was an overlap. So a 59% overlap rate. 37% of those matches were in the top 3 recommendations. So they give you a prioritized list of potential remedies. There was a 37% overlap with a top 3 recommendation in the purpose-built remedy finder. A 1-to-1 match where the actual homeopath's top recommendation was the remedy finder's top recommendation, 17%.
Oh my gosh. That is crazy town.
well, what's the implication of that, Denise?
Well,
Yeah,
oh, well,
yeah,
I'll just preview it. When
yeah.
we were looking at it, we were like, wow, that's not good. But after having looked at the large language models, I am totally revising my thinking about this.
And again, also to be clear, so the cases that you've chosen, these were through Homeopathy Help Now, and they were acute cases. These are not chronic cases. So these are
Well,
acute cases,
well,
Simple, acute cases.
acute cases, and just so the listeners know, so one of the things that we have been really clear about in our collection of data is that we only count, like if we're going to say that a case has been resolved, or that a case has, when we're going to count toward our data that a case has improved, we need to know from the client. We just don't make an assumption. I haven't heard back from them, therefore they must be good. And so even though our numbers are in the mid to high 80s in terms of moving a case forward, that is without the more cases where a person is just like, I'm not answering the phone, or I'm not gonna, like, we have inconclusive information about cases that we don't assume has moved a case forward, even though if you were to look at those cases and see the progression, it's pretty logical. It's a pretty fair assumption to say that those cases have moved forward. I think that that's really important. The difference between acute and chronic is also really key because chronic cases move up and down. They take a long time. It's a whole different prescribing, and management situation. But something acute, it like happens and you need to be able to resolve it. And so it's a contained situation. And so that makes this data much cleaner, right? But that little bit that I just said about, well, if it's acute or if it's chronic and all of those things, that criteria, there's no way in either a purpose-built model or, as far as I can imagine, a large language model to give consideration to all of those other factors that just come naturally to a homeopath. I think, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So this one I think is directed at the home prescriber in a way. And I think the message or the discussion point we've got to have is hold on, folks, because if you're assuming that by going to a remedy finder that you're going to get something accurate or something as, let's say, as good as as a senior practitioner from the HHN clinic, then you're only going to get there 17% of the time. And that's
That's
not
it.
good enough,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
And
Oh,
so it's a little bit of, well, it's a lot of caution. Firstly, 59% is not 100%, 37% is not 100%, and 17% ain't 100%. Now, that's not to say that in each of those 100 cases, all of those cases were also cured. The decision was made in terms of the design of that particular study. See, my design was let's take 100 guaranteed, non-negotiable cured cases, and I got talked down from that one because that's a cherry pick sample, and
oh.
so it's a sample of 100 cases that met the criteria.
Can I just ask a novice question then? Why in a situation like this where your question depends on comparison, why is cherry picking problematic if do you know what I'm saying? Like it would appear that a sample of cases that are resolved would be necessary. What was the argument against that?
Well, my argument against it is that when you're looking, we had to structure the study in a way that we could make meaningful conclusions from what we saw. And so we had to limit lots of things.
Okay.
Um, if you have an acute case, you are either going to get better or you are going to die. So unless we have a lot of people coming through the clinic who die, everybody is going to recover at some point.
Got it.
And what we would have had to have done, because we were only comparing the first remedy recommendation, because often what you're doing in the clinic is you're giving a first remedy, and if it doesn't work, then you're prescribing a second remedy. Or sometimes the first remedy works for a while, and then it stops working, and the symptoms change, and you have to manage the case. And so trying to figure out how to deal with all of those things to define what a cured case is was too hard for what we were trying to do. What we were trying to do is figure out when somebody came into the clinic and gave us a set of symptoms, and we tried to plug those symptoms into the remedy finder, what kind of overlap would we get? Can we all recognize the same important symptoms and the same features and remedies when presented with a case? It
Oh,
was much easier to construct a study that way.
okay. Thank you for explaining that. That makes so much sense because this reflects on what happened to us one of the papers about the COVID data was actually about this because what happens if the person doesn't have their first choice? You often give the second choice. And so, in an acute care setting where you need to move quickly, you're often giving the best remedy they have on hand that might be a placeholder until they get to the next one. And the homeopath then has to manage how the case moves forward. So, oh, that's genius what you guys decided to do. That makes total sense.
It is the criticism. It's a legitimate limitation of any research into acute homeopathy because of the fact is, by definition, you get better or you don't. And so you get better with the intervention or you don't get better with the intervention.
Right.
Yeah. Um, and so I call it the Elizabeth Thompson critique of homeopathy. That was her when she read our COVID paper. She said, "Yeah, but these are acute cases." So it's a perceived scholarly limitation. Yeah,
I mean, it is, and it's a really good one, isn't it?
it
But
is.
I guess there is a way that in looking at, well, the purpose for this study is different, so that it makes your data set decision so much better because it's really just looking at through does the decision making model that's being used a- appropriately address the problem. So that,
And
yeah.
yeah, and one of the things that we underestimated with the purpose-built software was, and this is a limitation of our study design, when you have to interpret, when you are being asked a set of closed-ended questions from an automated questionnaire, and we had to figure out from the case notes what the answers to those questions are, there's a difference there. And so one of the things that we found in this first study was that this 59% overlap rate was being done in spite of a very high number of null answers. Like a lot of times, the purpose-built software would ask a question and we wouldn't have an answer to it because it wasn't in the case notes or it wasn't a feature. And so, if you had an actual person who was actually sick going through the questionnaire, the results would have been different. We just don't know how different because it was a limitation of our study design.
Okay.
And that spawned a number of conversations and another and separate problem because what we now need to do is interview some supermums that use AI or use remedy finders and find out how they enter information. And one of the things that we're going to do is do a different, or maybe a similar sample or the same sample, but enter data as if we were those particular users. Because you'd appreciate that Rachel is a skilled, highly skilled professional homeopath that's
Mhm.
pretending to be somebody else, entering information, right?
Yeah. And
Oh,
and
that's
and
fantastic.
and that null answer limitation is what initially made us think that shifting our focus to the large language models, the chat GPTs, would increase our remedy overlap rate because it's not close-ended questions. We're feeding everything that we have. A professional homeopath asked these questions, made a remedy decision based on all of this information. So we're leaving nothing out.
Yeah.
So we thought that the overlap rate would be better.
Oh boy.
So what happened then? So
What
this is that's
happened?
our first. So that's our first project, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what happened to it because we actually were doing that study for a deadline, and the deadline was for a journal that we found that wanted to look at the application of AI in healthcare and our paper and the education around AI. And we felt that our paper met that brief, that prompt really beautifully. And we submitted it, and 2 days later we just got a desk rejection. And it's pretty rare in academic land to get a desk rejection. Usually it's because we don't want to talk about that or look under that rock, or we the editor in chief says your paper is not in alignment with this particular journal edition
Yeah.
that we want to publish. So we were surprised by that. We wondered maybe a little bit of anti-homeopathy nonsense going on or something else. We don't know. Anyway, we've resubmitted it elsewhere, and we have um, not heard from the reviewers as yet.
Okay, so what happened with the large language models? Like this is edge of the seat stuff over here.
Okay. Wow.
I'm really into this.
Firstly, there was a nudist colony, and then
I know, right?
and then
Okay,
what happened?
fair enough, fair enough. I
There's a
was all
bunch
about the
of
nudist colony. Now I'm in a hurry to hear it.
then
All right.
then some homeopaths got out their repertories.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so Al's original vision was let's plug, let's plug anonymized, privacy protected case notes into Chat GPT and see what happens. And so that's kind of what we did, but we multiplied it by 4. So we have been systematically taking the same 100 cases and plugging the case notes into 4 AI models to see what we get. And so out of 100, so far I'm on like number 57. So we're over halfway done. We're not quite done yet, but we've done enough to kind of see what happens when you do this. And of the 4 AI models, the highest overlap rate is 28, 28 out of 57. And the lowest is 15 out of 27. Or sorry, 15 out of 57. The number 1 matches. The highest is 12. 12 out of 57 number 1 matches. So it's we're not talking any better than the purpose-built homeopathy model. And let's see what happens by the time we get done entering our 100, but I don't know that it is going to be any better. And so not only do you not get a better overlap rate when you give the AI large language model all of the data, the 4 AI models, when you enter the same information, will often not give you the same answer. And sometimes when you enter the same information into the same AI model, a few hours later, or sometimes even a few minutes later, it will give you a different answer. There was one, go ahead.
No, no, well, what are the 4 pieces of software you're using?
ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, which is Anthropic, and DeepSeek, which is a Chinese AI model.
Got it. And what were we going to say?
I don't know what I was going to say. Completely lost the plot.
I interrupted. Yeah. So, D, isn't that interesting? Firstly, a similar to lower overlap with
Yep.
the sample of live, let's call them live human cases. Is that a accurate way to say it? The results that come out of a human brain, a homeopath, and and if that's the case, then what are the implications? And again, the implications pretty startling, because that's not a good overlap. That's not what we would be expecting or hoping for an alternative to using a professional homeopath. I
And
think,
so, oh, go ahead.
No, you go, Rachel.
yep,
Part of our study design is not just trying to get the overlap because these large language models are smart. We're asking follow-up questions about why they made the decisions that they made. So we're asking each AI model the same series of questions to start, which is, what are your remedy recommendations for these symptoms? Please provide the sources that you used and a justification for your top remedy recommendation. So all of the AIs are asked that question. So they're showing us how they're thinking through. These are the sources we used. This is why we chose this top remedy. And they were all, giving you amazing justifications. They sound super smart, but sometimes they're totally in conflict with one another, depending on the AI model. When an AI model does not match the homeopath's recommendation, we will add an extra question that says, well, why not remedy X, which is the homeopath's recommendation? And sometimes you get really interesting answers. There are some AI models that when you push back, they'll flip their recommendation and totally change. Some AI models will like bear down and stick with their justification. Sometimes justifiably, sometimes they just appear to be making things up. There have been a couple of times where I was told that because someone had thick yellow snot, it wasn't a good candidate for pulsatilla,
Which is a keynote for pulsatilla. If
which is
you,
a keynote for
yeah.
pulsatilla. And there was another one that it was something about warm drinks and a remedy, and it was clearly within the realm of action of this remedy. And so it just flat out just doesn't know some things. There are other times when you can tell, because the study isn't done, we need to go into the case data, but you can tell what the homeopath was thinking when they were prescribing something that the AIs didn't get. And you can tell that the AIs do not recognize remedy relationships. They don't know how LM potencies work. They don't know about genus epidemicus remedies that we have been using for some of these. When everybody's getting the same bug, we know what remedy to give that works, but the AI doesn't. So there are very clear, things that we can see that the AI just doesn't know.
And is that because of where they're drawing information, right? Because when we talked about this in the research meeting, I was blown away by what you were saying. Can you talk about the information sources?
Yeah, so when you're asking the AI to provide its sources, because we're not, let me back up for a second and then remind me if I forget. One of the important things about an AI model is you have to train the AI model on real world data to get good information, right? And so if you do not have the privacy protections on for the AI model that you're using, everything that you type into that model is getting sucked up by the model and it's being used to refine its answers in the future. And so for homeopathy, there is no feedback loop in these large language models, right? There is in the purpose-built model, but it's voluntary, right? So in order to make these models good, they need to know, I recommended these three remedies, but this is the one that worked. So you have a feedback loop, and then this is supposed to be the intelligent part of artificial intelligence. That feedback loop refines the model. And so you're feeding it the information that you want it to learn from so that it makes better choices in the future. The place where we're at now is there is no training. These AI models are trying to be all things to all people, and it doesn't necessarily know anything more about homeopathy than what is kind of out there in the collective internet world. And so it doesn't know how to weight information from some random blog versus an original source. And because they're limited to what is openly available, if they're not stealing intellectual property, they are reliant sometimes on information that is incorrect. And so, in one of the cases that I was using, I was doing the pushback, why not remedy X? And the AI said, well, because it doesn't, I used Kent's repertory and it doesn't match this keynote symptom. And so I went to my Kent's repertory. I had to go through a couple of dead links that the AI gave me because it doesn't always give you good sources. It gives you dead links sometimes. I was able to follow the link to the Kent repertory online that the AI used, and the rubric was wrong. Like it just didn't have the remedy in that rubric that is actually in the real Kent's repertory rubric and that the homeopath used to make that remedy recommendation. So, and it doesn't know how to weight, it doesn't know how to judge, it doesn't know how to evaluate the truth of anything. It's just kind of sucking everything up and spitting it out.
So are we at a phase of our professional development where we're going a bit early, where we've not had another year or two of training of large language models and a whole lot of additional source material being available or being able to be found? Is it that, or are we demonstrating that we are early, or are we demonstrating that it's wrong and not to be trusted?
I think we're demonstrating that if you want it to do what you want it to do, you need to build something that is smart, using your sources, using your data, and getting your agent to do. It can't think for you, but it can help you. Like there are things that AI can do that can be helpful for us. I mean, it can give you ideas about remedies that you may not have thought of.
Can
It,
can, can we therefore
yeah.
just talk about, and what tone are you using? One of the things that I learned by reading a book I found in a Barnes and Noble, dear God, um, about AI.
Actually,
What
wait, I just have to have a little aside. When
Barnes
family
and
was
Noble?
here, and there was a very particular want that our sister had to find a particular type of shoe. And so she wanted to go to this outlet that was in a neighborhood that I was 100% positive that you don't take a bunch of New Zealanders to. And I suggested a DSW shoe warehouse. And they had never seen such a phenomenon, right? Of like 5 gazillion pairs of shoes. And it happened to be adjacent to a Barnes and Noble. And so I quickly tired of the Skechers search and I left to go to the Barnes and Noble. They all came and met me, and the awe was just as grand. It's like, wow, you can get shoes and then you could get more books than you ever thought of. You can go to the bathroom and you could have a coffee and all within, Anyway, Al had never been to one of those big bookshops. Like we've got the little, we have our little bookshops right in our neighborhood, whatever. And his face, he was sort of drunk with possibility in this, which is actually, I really like this because I think that it does speak to a bit of what the initial AI experience is like. We get drunk with possibility. We see that everything we want to know is at our fingertips. It seems as if it's going to make our life so much easier. And then the stark reality is something very, very different.
I feel somewhat provincial, Denise. Thank you. Um,
I don't know that
Suffocating.
I'm not proud of like American superstores. I mean, I don't go to, this is not where I shop, but man, was it
Yeah.
to take a group of Kiwis there.
But yeah, that part of the story is absolutely true. Um, and but what I learned from that book was that the prompt is key, and the way in which you engage with your model is critical. And by prompting it, and so that my question is, how are you prompting it? Are you using this as a research assistant? Are you engaging with it with lots of please and thank yous? Are you giving it a slap every now and again? What are you, how are you engaging well with that?
Uh, well, we're asking all the AIs the same question, right? Can you help me find a remedy for this set of symptoms? Please provide, the sources used in justification. And I'm very polite. I'm not threatening the AI. I'm not
Sure.
telling the AI it's stupid. But I think what matters is, whether the AI is useful or not. It depends on your level of knowledge and engagement and your ability to push back and ask better questions. And so you can see if the model is kind of making things up if you ask it questions that it can't know. Like, the other day I asked, we know that you know, that the AI doesn't know how to manage a case, and we know that it doesn't know how to do LMs. And so it just introduced a new term, the term of remedy saturation, right? Like it acted like it knew. If I didn't know better, I would have been like, oh, yeah, I guess there just must be saturation with this remedy, which I have never heard. Um, but you have to know more than the machine, and you have to use the machine as a tool and not use the tool. And this is something Denise would tell us all the time in school, right? With the repertory, like, do not let the repertory be your oracle. Use it as a tool, right? And I think that AI is the same. It is a tool. It can help you find things more efficiently. It can give you ideas of things that you may not have thought of, but it's not in the driver's seat. You need to be in the driver's seat. And if you're in the driver's seat, you can steer it and use it in a way that is, that is helpful.
I think that is an amazing conclusion or discussion point,
It
which
is.
I
And it
was
actually
definitely not expecting. I love
Well,
that.
it leads to the other thing. This is the part that I was hoping we could get to, which is so as Rachel said, one of my a quotable Denise thing, the repertory is not an oracle, right? It is an index compiled over more than 200 years by a whole bunch of people who spoke different languages, who didn't agree with each other, and who made a lot of mistakes. And mistakes in translation have perpetuated over time.
Hence
Therefore,
students.
what's that?
Hence students.
Yes. Okay. Now, this is the thing. Because as we move forward because we're not going to avoid AI. And so as Rachel pointed out earlier, the information that gets fed into it or that is extracted by it is what is going to bias what the outcomes are. And there are a couple of key limitations that I have been thinking a lot about. The first one is what is the intention of people who are creating AI models? Because you know that there are a whole bunch of them that are being, worked on right now. There's no way that they're not. And the question is going to be, so I was in a meeting not that long ago where somebody got so excited and they were like, imagine, with AI, how much faster we can repertorize and see so many more people. And I was like, oh, sister, I don't know where you got that idea, but it repertorization, I mean, there is so much discernment. Like this index is so not, I mean, I don't want to say it's not reliable, but if you don't know how to use it, it just becomes this random thing. And so building your critical thinking as a clinician is about discernment of how you use that index. And you've got to be 2 to 3 steps ahead of what the possible outcomes are going to be. And when is a remedy too deep? When is a remedy too superficial? When is a remedy inimical to a person's larger state of health? What are the red flags that you have to look for in the overall, response to the remedy? Because it's all about case management. So that's like one flaw. And we had our first encounter with this during the early COVID time when there were different portals that we were feeding into that were collecting information, right, to conduct research about COVID. And we had to decide which portals we would contribute to because they each were looking at it through a different perspective and they had a different idea in mind. For example, one of them was focused on rubric. How would you say it out? It was like about the predict rubric repertorization predictability, right?
Elliptical.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one thing. So if you're driven by, if a model is driven by something that is inherently reductionistic at its starting point, it's not going to become more holistic in its outcome. There's no way. This is not going to be, it doesn't become inductive at that point, right? It's never going to become inductive from that. I think that that's a challenge. What I've been working on in testing AI is kind of leading me to that conclusion. But the other thing is that we have this other problem, which is there's a lot of crap data out there. And there are a lot of people who are just, I mean, if you just do a little survey of how people are practicing homeopathy and the flaws in thinking that are out there, that's what's feeding the data set. And this is the thing that came up in our meeting that kind of freaked me out. The lack of community conversation about potential negative outcomes is a problem because unless people are willing to actually acknowledge that poor prescribing, overprescribing, continual prescribing of inappropriate remedies has the potential to yield an outcome that's not what you want, unless we feed that in, then there will never be any consequences. So there's not going to be an off switch. If no one is willing to admit a possible consequence, then that will not be a part of the data set, right? Or am I just making this up?
No, you're not. And I wonder if it's something that comes with years in the seat, because with years in the seat, you will see gradually um, more and more folks and sometimes great and successful outcomes, and but every now and again poor outcomes, especially as your cases get harder and harder. And I just think that for the I think for the those folks that don't have a handbrake, or these days there's no handbrake, guardrail, perhaps, lots of confidence, no guardrails, and total enthusiasm about homeopathy, that haven't seen consequences and do not feel accountable, then you're totally right.
And can I just add the one kind of scary moment that I had when we were doing the first paper, when I was thinking about what does AI look like for homeopathy? Like if we want AI to do what we think that it can do for chronic cases, right? Like this is all just the simple acutes, right? Like this is keynote prescribing, and we still are not very advanced. In order to get some kind of AI to be able to have the data set that it is trained on, the feedback mechanisms that are required in order to outthink a homeopath, the level of private health information that would have to be shared, I just can't even think about it. forget about an all things to all people, big out there for everybody model like a chat GPT, right? Like these models need a lot of think about the amount of information you get in a 2 hour intake from somebody and think about feeding all of that into a computer and where that information sits and who holds that information and will it be protected. That was the moment that I had that told me this is a place where we need to have breaks. Chronic homeopathy prescribing by AI would require an amount of personal private data that I don't think that people are ready to give up. That's that would be my bottom line.
Wow. And so then I think is the consequence to that, I think all the things we just said are tying together because in the absence of such information will come bad data. So that if the true information required in order to even begin the process of discernment for this type of decision making, in the absence of that, then protocol prescribing, all this sort of clearings and all this other stuff is going to be what people find on AI. So it becomes like a self-perpetuating problem, doesn't it?
Yeah. And at least that preserves your privacy, right? But
Yeah.
if you want it to be better, there are compromises that are going to be made.
Yikes.
So compromises around privacy and compromises about the sharing of um, traditional, original, and primary sources. Uh, that just sorry, one thing you said there just got me caught up because I remember in the middle of our paper, the one we've sent for publication, it is the first time I think you said, "Where did you get this information from?" And the large language model referred to the Australian report from 2015,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And um, of course, that is, you know, that's a problem. So, this tool is referencing information that it has and is producing information that seems and is an answer to a question, which is what it has to do. It doesn't have to be correct, but it has to provide an answer. And therefore it's doing its job. And so if I'm just as we're having this conversation, I'm going, but therefore maybe the impetus for us is to train it and train it aggressively and quickly
And safely.
and
And
safely.
safely. So, okay, so because I've been so excited hearing what you guys have been doing in this department, I decided that I was going to try using it from another perspective, right? So, asking questions using my own information. So, I basically took information from my own research and questions that I had related to it. So, and pulling from historical sources to see what that, what would it yield? And I used deep research ChatGPT. So there's another setting, deep research, which goes beyond just giving back information and goes into further reaches of primary sources. This actually took almost 24 hours to turn over, and it wasn't finished with my referencing. So I just pulled the plug and I said, send me what you have and we'll reference later because I'll edit it first. Anyway, and so the question that I asked was about how homeopathy went from being potentially the, the dominant form of medicine in the United States in the 1900s, or at least a strong corollary that had institutional presence that would have gone forward, and what brought us through to where we are today, and then what would the potential consequences be. And through this dialogue, um, it's been really interesting because one of the things that really came out of it was I asked to so I've been asking it to search for primary source references going everywhere from whether it be books from the 19th and 20th century, proceedings from conferences, right? Peer-reviewed articles, contemporary peer-reviewed articles. It asked me if I wanted it international, if I wanted to focus on the United States. It asked me about the Australia report. And so we had a conversation about that. And it actually recognized that it was based on false assumptions. And this is because I think the kind of conversation I was having. Anyway, do you know what came out after taking it through this argument? So like building, you have to build your own argument. It doesn't build an argument for you. But basically that I'll just read some of the conclusion. The path forward, fidelity, not innovation. I love that it chose Hahnemann's um, word fidelity. I did not use that in mine, but Hahnemann talked about fidelity to the system. So it was interesting that it used that word. Um, the greatest danger to homeopathy, this is today, is not external suppression, but internal betrayal. Because I also fed in the questions that, around the FDA and what's happening with the, legislation and so forth. The abandonment of Hahnemannian principles, single remedy, similars, individualized totality, careful case taking, has not only degraded clinical outcomes, but seeded public mistrust. We are now approaching the second collapse of homeopathy, not from external sources like Flexner, but from within. And this time the stakes are higher. Children harmed, families misled, and a powerful healing tradition turned into a fringe experiment. The path forward is clear: rigor, ethics, and fidelity to method. Homeopathy does not need more innovations. It needs courageous practitioners who will say, as Herring did, that to preserve the truth of this art, we must be willing to walk away from institutions that betray it. How about that? I mean, your faces, if you guys are just listening, the stunned silence is Rachael and Alastair just sitting there like, wow. Um, yeah. And the questions.
One of the things that I want to say, and it really relates to this whole conversation, is that the I personally am not of the opinion that homeopathy and all of homeopathy activity needs to be in the hands of the professional or the medical
Totally.
or the naturopathic homeopath.
I
I
totally.
think there's an absolute appropriate um, home and domestic use of homeopathy that should be widely available and celebrated and utilized and encouraged. And so, who was it? Was it you and me having that conversation the other day about Culpeper and
Yeah, that was our last podcast.
all right, I knew I talked to someone about it
Right.
recently.
Yeah. So
So
people who are listening will be like, I heard her talk. But this is
so
the thing, though. It wasn't
yeah.
based on that, right? So, and even because it asked me about over-the-counter combination remedies, or it included OTC combination. I said that's not. I don't think that that's the issue. Chestol is not the problem. A sleep calm thing is not the problem, right? And so as we went through, it was, and of course I fed in, Hahnemann's conversation with Herring, the footnote to aphorism 56 about isopathy. And I asked it to search for any longitudinal studies about nosode prescribing and isopathy. And it was unable to find any. Now, that doesn't mean they don't exist, as we've been talking about, right? So if anybody has them, I would love to see. But it talked about the rise of tautopathy and nosode-centric protocols, right? And this idea of uh, clearing whatever, match not to the patient's presenting state, but to their medical history or presumed toxic load. And it's nosodes, remedies made from disease products, are being used in aggressive sequences to delayer the patient, supposedly unearthing ancestral trauma, toxicity, or inherited miasms. These nosodes are often unproved, lack published clinical data, and have no standardized sourcing, yet they are central to many modern quote unquote detox protocols, often marketed under the language of vibrational healing or terrain theory. Many of these systems reject case analysis in favor of fixed protocols or intuitive dosing. The number of remedies prescribed in these programs can range from a dozen to over 100, administered in rapid sequence or rotation. This is not homeopathy. It is a distortion built on untested assumptions and amplified by poor oversight. I mean, I find this to be kind of astounding. So, again, though, it's giving back to me what I fed in and the questions that were asked, but
Which I suppose takes us full circle because
that's
what the researcher asks is what the what's gonna um, what's gonna emerge from the experiment. And so, Denise, you're working with a research assistant to, and creating a really compelling narrative there. What we've done is because we've got a research and have approached this vein um, of for mining in a particular way with a particular question, we're finding what we are finding as well. It's the some of the critiques of reductionistic research, um, uh, you know, uh, dialogue. But I think are we in a spot that we're gonna wind this down, D, or is
well,
it?
I have a question.
Yeah,
I actually have been thinking about what a question for wrapping up. And my question for Rachel, after spending time sort of, you're coming from an advanced practitioner stance and a researcher and a clinician, like all, well, a practitioner, clinician, whatever, but you've worked on the helpline, so you understand sort of the systems that went into it and da 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 da. Okay. So knowing that you come to it with like you come by it honestly, what the question that I have is because I know that like one of the things in pushing a profession forward is always, it's momentum and it's money. And so there are people with money who are going to be making decisions about how we sort of move these next tools forward. That's how we got these purpose-built models, right? Small groups of people who have cash are building them. And we see, okay, I mean, they're trying, fine, but if we were to blue sky, what are the things that if a person who's got, the money and the wherewithal to begin one of these projects, or maybe it's not even someone from within homeopathy, it might be somebody who's, Silicon Valley person who's had great success, or they have a child that has been whatever, and they're like, I've got an extra, billion laying around. Let's see if we can't just automate this and whatever. From that blue sky perspective, what would be the things that you would ask them to think about? What are the priorities that need to be in mind?
Well, I guess if we're going to blue sky it, whoever was creating it would have to want to do something better than is out there now. And what we have out there now with our professional software is pretty good. Like we already have a repertory that is linked to a library that is full of, case information that you can do a word search on whatever esoteric symptom that your client has. You know what I'm saying? Like what we have now is pretty good. The thing that we don't have is real world, a real world feedback mechanism. So, how do you replicate a group of homeopaths that are sharing information about case successes and case failures in a way to guide remedy selection? And can you do it for acutes? I think that it is possible to do it for acutes. I don't think that we're at the point where we can or should even try to do it for chronics, but acutes, I think we could do it.
I love that. And I guess the wrapping around it is like the knowledge of the people who are going forward, like the hubris that you hear about with people who think that they really know what's happening with homeopathy. I mean, I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure. And, and like we're in the trenches just, teaching and doing it, and you come up with more questions and answers a lot of the time. And there are people who walk around with sort of this, yeah, I know this. There's like how do you even, I mean, I guess one of the things that I like about working with the model, like working with the large language model, is that it seems so open to and receptive to thinking something through. Yeah, I'll give one example because I've been working on my like asking it questions to see if I can find more source material for my Hahnemannian history work. And so I asked it a couple of trick questions about different places in alchemical history that information would have been drawn from. And as we would go through a series of questions, it would give me back an answer that we had already determined. I had then let it know, I'm not following this. You're right. You're right. And here are the reasons why, right? That openness, let me think of how to frame this question. You can do that if you're just going through and looking at different books that, and documents. But if you've got to make a nuanced clinical decision, right? Like are we at that point with the technology? It must be, right? You can go to Mars.
I feel like at
Rachael.
this point, where we're at with these AI large language models is that they are um, uh, in a lot of ways, you engage with it and it will reflect back to you what you want to hear. Like it's this advanced autocomplete mechanism. What I think we need to do in order to move the conversation forward is, you know, you know, protocol people or detox people or whatever, we're all saying we know what we know and we're confident in our results because of XYZ.
Right.
But what we're not doing is we're not systematically looking at here was the case, here's what we did, how did that person do? Feedback loop. That is what we are not doing. We are
Right.
not results based, circling that learning back and having this model help us make better decisions based on what we told that model worked or didn't work before. That's where I think AI can be helpful. But unless we start using it as a tool in that way, in an honest way, not like we heal clients because, we have the best brand of homeopathy. That's not what AI will help us do is tell things to ourselves that we don't know and that we aren't trying to bias when we put it in. Like that's where the tool comes in, is it's helping you check yourself with data.
Terrified though, because you just opened up a door for me that I hadn't thought about, which is trolls. Because I just thought about, okay, if we're talking about a feedback loop. So I had a case I took 2 weeks ago today, that set me off into vertigo. I was so upset. And this was a child that had been given over 100 different remedies, thousands of doses inside of a year, and was notably worse after. Notably worse after. Now, if I were to take that, I would have incomplete information because mom doesn't even have all the info. She's like, oh, they just told me give another detox, do another, whatever you want, just, do it. But if I were to feed that in, I have an inherent bias because I believe that that has the potential to be harmful. So then there's an intentionality there. It just makes me think of like Ernst and how, right? So like is there going to be a troll? As one of the leading voices in protocol homeopathy, I somebody just told me has a video out saying that aggravations don't exist, right? Then they sent me, I got a screenshot yesterday. In fact, so I'll just give you a little snippet because somebody responded to the screenshot and said, I mean, sorry, somebody responded to this video who's a homeopath who I don't know, but I have heard of, and said, if only this person could be sued for malpractice, if only we had a strong enough professional organization to censor her. I've got many patients in my practice who've either come, and it goes on and on and on to say that people are really experiencing this and there are negative things. Now, because I am in favor of this person's narrative, I'm like, yay, I don't want to see people get hurt. But then you've got all the people on the other side who are like, but I believe in what this other person is saying. At what point, right? do we like, is it the stronger voice? Is it a populist thing like the way that Wikipedia was meant to be? Like how much, given the misinformation and mishistorical information in homeopathy, like is it even, so I feel like a total buzzkill. But like thinking about what what the lift is if you're using a large language model that is pulling from the largest pool of information, right? Is that even, oy, um,
Yeah. Well, if you're pulling from all information, I think that the assumption is that if you have one person who has an interest in saying aggravations don't exist, and you have 50 people who say, oh, yeah, well, I had one and here's what it looks like,
right,
the large language, like the truth comes out. The idea is that when information is democratized and shared, ideally, the truth comes out. If you want to train a model, you have to train a model on a lot of data so
right,
that it can discern what happens. And so, that is the promise, but also the challenge of, what we're leaping into. And I don't think we're into the era of plug it into the Oracle and it will give you the answer. We clearly are not there
Yeah.
yet. And how we get there is, I don't know, it's a good question.
Mm.
wow. All right, we got work to do.
We got work to do.
Got work to do, but it's a holiday. And Rachel's got people coming over later. They're going to see the fireworks. We have a meeting with the Faculty of Homeopathy Research Board in 10 minutes because it's not a holiday there. And then we're going to go to a friend's house and go swimming.
Nice.
Good time.
Hey, this is great. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
It
Yeah.
was so great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me on. This was really fun.
Was your telling us about the nudist colony kind of code for all your friends coming over later are going to be nude or totally different?
Man, I hope not.
Okay,
No,
good. All right.
I don't think so.
All right. Thanks. See you later,
Okay.
everybody.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Dreaming of becoming a homeopath, but you need a little more time to make it happen? The Academy of Homeopathy Education's part-time program gives a bit more flexibility to study. It's a 4-year journey designed to fit into your real and busy life. Learn more at ahe.online.